What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and in today's video we're going to be talking about The Strangers Chapter 1. Directed by Renny Harlin, this film stars people like Madelaine Petsch, Froy Gutierrez, Emma Horvath, Ryan Bown, and more. Oh, wow. Wow. You guys know I usually like to start these off with a little bit of positivity and just like talk about the movie a little bit before I even get into my general thoughts, or at least that's how I'm trying to do these reviews these days, where I can at least touch on the merits that the film has before we get into the review. And unfortunately, I have to start off this review by saying this was horrible. Guys, I really don't even know what much more to say on this movie other than this was just a complete and utter letdown. When I look back at the film from 2008, The Strangers, while it isn't a masterpiece in a lot of ways, it's a horror slasher, a home invasion film that has always stood out to me in the genre. I have fond memories of checking it out with my family when I was a teenager, and it honestly made me lose sleep. Home invasion is one of those things that has always creeped me out the most when it comes to horror films, because when it comes to things that are paranormal or things that are just out of this world, it's so easy to just tell yourself that that stuff isn't real, that that's not what's going to happen. I don't really find myself scared by the things that are demonic or things like that. And so in the case of home invasion, that's something that could be very real. It's something that does happen to people. There are just sick people out there that terrorize poor, innocent individuals. And so that first Strangers film, again, while not a masterpiece in a lot of ways, I think is a really solid home invasion slasher film that has fantastic atmosphere. And while the characters in that film don't necessarily always have the best logical decision making, you feel like they're real people. The two main characters in that film feel like actual people who are scared and oftentimes make irrational decisions in a very high tension situation. The sequel, Prey at Night, is a film I have also reviewed here on the channel and didn't necessarily give the greatest review to, but I look back on it now far more fondly, as we are here now talking about the first installment in what's meant to be a trilogy that is essentially a reboot to the series. And here with this film, Chapter 1, it is essentially a soft reboot of the first film, with literally every key moment of that 2008 film being played out over the course of this film, just with a different set of context, just with a little bit of a different kind of situation that we got going on here. So before I continue on with my thoughts on this, let's talk about what this movie is all about. The movie opens up when we're introduced to the characters of Maya and Ryan, a couple who are now on a road trip to Portland, Oregon, because the girlfriend Maya has a big interview coming up. They haven't gotten married yet, but they're looking to possibly get married, and this trip is kind of solidifying that relationship a little bit more, as there's the possibility of her getting this promotion or this big job that would have Ryan move from his hometown or his home city to where they're going to be moving in Portland. If she gets this, it'll be a big change in their life. Not too long into the film, though, their car ends up breaking down in a diner in this area of Oregon that doesn't have a whole lot of people, and they end up learning about a small Airbnb that is nearby. It's the only place they can stay because the local motel is not up and running at the moment, so they decide to get this Airbnb to stay the night as the car is being repaired, only for the strangers to arrive and of course ruin their night, tormenting them throughout the course of the hour-and-a-half film that we have here. And that is the base premise, and what unfolds over the course of the next hour and a half is exactly what you saw in the 2008 Strangers film. I mean, it blows my mind that they didn't even try to do something different. While the second film, The Strangers Prey at Night, does have homages to the first film by repeating certain lines of dialogue or having moments that are reminiscent of scenes from the 2008 film, this film says, yeah, we're not going to do anything like that. The general idea might be slightly different, but it's still about a couple that stays in a cabin in the middle of the woods, far from everybody, who ultimately are in a new segment of their relationship, only to be tormented throughout the course of the film. And everything from lines of dialogue to specific moments that happen throughout the course of the film are exactly as you would remember them from the 2008 film. Watching the film, I had a checklist in my head because that 2008 Strangers film is a film I've actually seen quite a few times. Like I said, I do really enjoy it. So I know the key moments of that movie. And as I was watching this movie, they were consistently setting up what was going to be the next section, and they were essentially doing it word for word. There are slight differences to the way they approach it here, but as I was watching it, I was just kind of checking off every single box in my head as we got through lines of dialogue or key moments from the first film that are just being redone here, but substantially worse than they were done in the first film. I mean, this is just a cheap imitation of what that first Strangers film is. It completely lacks any of the creepy atmosphere and vibes that you feel from that first film. And again, while I say like the main characters make illogical choices at times in that first film, the performances are so solid in that first film that you do believe these are really scared people who are making irrational choices in like really high tension situations. Whereas in the case of this, the performances were just not great to me. The one that really stood out to me as the weakest performance of the main two has to be Froy Gutierrez as Ryan, the boyfriend. There are moments in this film where both of them, but specifically him, are just underacting to moments that should be terrifying. There are moments where these characters are in absolute peril, and you never feel that peril from the actors. They give pretty generic, scared kind of performances throughout the course of the film. There are moments where you can feel like they don't even fully know what to do in those moments. And I don't know if that comes down to the writing, if that came down to the director, or if that comes down to the performers, or just a mixed bag of everybody not necessarily having a unique vision here. It ultimately felt like they were like, hey, we're going to make 3 new Strangers films, and the first one's just going to be just like the first one, and people are going to love all those callbacks. But ultimately what you have here is a film that just feels like a cheap imitation, a film that doesn't have any originality, a film that ultimately is just very cookie cutter. And when it comes down to the other artistic merits, the film starts with some text on the screen similar to the first one, almost painting this film as a very brutal film, only for it to be fairly tame when it came down to the kills and the gore, the blood splatter. There really isn't an abundance here when it comes down to practical effects that are gory and uncomfortable to look at, and there really isn't anything about this film that's scary or creepy or eerie. As somebody who is genuinely afraid of the idea of home invasion, there was nothing about this film that ever made me feel uncomfortable, and all of the scares in this film, whether they be jump scares or small little moments where they want you to notice that there's a character standing in the back without any noise whatsoever, all of those things felt so telegraphed. You saw it coming from a mile away, and there just ultimately was nothing about this film that felt wildly redeeming. The film is competently shot and the performances are suitable enough, but it never elevates the material and never does anything new with the Strangers, and it ultimately just feels like what I think is supposed to be a cash grab. But I haven't even really heard a lot of people talking about this movie. I haven't even really spoken to a lot of people who plan to see this movie, and from all of my movie review peers who have already seen this movie, the reviews are not good. The idea that they decided to just make a Strangers trilogy and have the first movie just be a cookie cutter version of the first film and expect that we as an audience are going to be so excited for the second and third. I usually am the kind of person that's like, okay, let's see what they do with the next installments, even if I didn't like a certain installment earlier in a franchise. But in the case of The Strangers, honestly, leave it as it is, or just make a new Strangers movie somewhere down the line where it's a new situation. That's something in retrospect that I can kind of respect Prey at Night for doing at this point. Like, while it does have moments that are very reminiscent of that first film, it at least centers on a family this time around. The setting is ever so slightly different. The situations are ever so slightly different. You have characters of different ages that are in the mix. Whereas in the case of this, again, I don't want to sound overly redundant, just like this movie, but it is literally just a first film with lesser actors, lesser filmmaking, and the moments just don't land nearly as well. And this is, for me, a perfect kind of showcase of how execution of a similar premise is so important to making a movie what it is. You can have 2 different movie teams, 2 different filmmaking teams creating a similar movie with a very similar premise, with almost the exact same script, and have it be so wildly different just because of the execution and the vision. And when it comes down to this Strangers film, the fact that we are so far removed from the original film that we are getting a remake and it's just so bad in comparison, it's kind of mind-boggling. It's kind of mind-boggling. I don't even know what they were thinking with this movie. I don't know how they watched this and thought, yeah, we should release this. Fans of The Strangers are going to be excited to see this. The theater I saw it in was dead silent. As the movie ended, I heard people laughing. I watched it with my buddy, the Big Rob Theory, and the two of us just couldn't help but laugh throughout the course of the film. And we're 2 people who remember being scared by the first one when we were teenagers, only for this one to just genuinely feel lifeless. That's the best way I can describe this. A lifeless, cheap imitation of the first 2008 The Strangers, which I highly recommend over this any day of the week. So that's going to be my thoughts on this one. I really don't have an abundance positive to say on this movie. It was a slog to get through. My eyelids were heavy in moments. I was bored to tears while watching it, and it just felt so uninspired that I just almost feel offended as a fan of The Strangers. As a fan of The Strangers who chose to go see this instead of some of the other big releases that came out this weekend in theaters, I feel betrayed because it just ultimately feels like they didn't have any vision for bringing this franchise back. I don't think there's any demand for another one after this, and if there is, I'll be completely and utterly surprised. So that's going to be my thoughts on The Strangers Chapter 1. Are you guys even looking fucking forward to Chapter 2? I know the fuck I'm not. I'm absolutely not. Like, I'm genuinely annoyed by how much of a blatant ripoff this movie was without having its own identity in any way, shape, or form. So yeah, guys, definitely leave some comments down below. Let me know what you guys think. And I'll see you guys next time as hopefully we talk about a substantially better film, or even just slightly, even just so ever so slightly. The movie can be just ever so slightly higher than Ass Juice, and I will be more happy on this channel. This movie sucked. Bye-bye.